Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm Sana Maqbool and you're watching Pakistan TV, and here are the top stories that we'll be talking about in the show today. The first is with reference to what is going on regarding terror networks in the region, particularly the nexus between India and Afghanistan that seems to be on the rise, something that the Pakistan Army has also stated that India is using Afghan territory to launch and support terrorist attacks towards Pakistan, and this is something that has happened previously as well and has been put forward in the past by Pakistan as well. The ISPR in a press conference has also reiterated that there's a lot that needs to be done, particularly in the provinces of KP and Balochistan, with regards to the national action plan that needs to be put in place. And that, of course, a threat that exists from outside of the country, particularly in Afghanistan, with Indian elements in support that use the Afghan territory against Pakistan. And so we're going to be exploring how much of that is moving forward and what can be done with regards to that. Our next story is going to take a look at what has happened in Gaza with reference to the first phase of the landmark deal achieved between Israel and Hamas. And while this is a welcome step, it is important to see how exactly will this unfold, particularly with the U.S. president also aiming to visit the Middle East, Israel and Egypt, where there have been celebrations planned as part of these announcements. And then, of course, we'll be seeing a hostage and prisoner exchange. What really is going to be the way forward after that is unclear at the moment, but at least a ceasefire is on the horizon, and that is something which is very, very integral to peace in Gaza. And lastly, we're going to be taking a look at the very important Nobel Peace Prize, and something, of course, that Mr. Trump had an eye on, but it was, in fact, the Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, who won this Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts towards establishing democracy in a country that has been marred by dictatorship since 2013. These are going to be our top stories of the hour that we'll be focusing on in the show today. Our first story is going to take a look, of course, at what is happening in the region. Terrorism and the threat that Pakistan faces, particularly from Afghanistan, is very, very important. And then, of course, is the nexus of the way that there are Indian spoiler elements that are exploiting that and using Afghan territory to launch and support terrorist attacks towards Pakistan, a threat that is not just for Pakistan to be concerned about, but also for the entire region. For this, we've been joined by Air Commodore retired Mr. Khalid Chisti. Thank you very much for joining us, Chisti Sab. And I want you to take your opinion first in terms of where we stand in terms of how to protect Pakistani soil from these spoilers. There's a lot that needs to be done within the borders as well. And I'll talk more about what the DGISPR spoke on that front too. But when we talk about what is happening outside the borders, there have been time and again a lot of calls and statements from Pakistan towards the Afghan Taliban regime to ensure that their territory is not used against Pakistan. But unfortunately, that has not stopped, and we've seen that now Indian elements, of course, are reinvigorating this terror network within the region. What really is the way forward on that front?
We've been talking about the India-Pakistan conflict which took place in May 2025. And we saw that the way Indian, obviously the Air Force particularly, was given a very, very befitting response by the Pakistan Air Force. And overall, obviously, their military objective was nowhere close to being achieved. That created a lot of frustration amongst the minds and hearts of the armed forces in general, but obviously the political agenda was also left behind. And then in those days, some of the media who asked me that what is the way forward, not that I predicted, but I analyzed that because the Indians have been given a very befitting response right up in the air and on the ground, they would opt for a proxy option, which means that they obviously use those forces which are hidden, they're sleeping, they're less visible, they're obviously not, they're over. These covert operations obviously were obviously on the table. Why? Because they were left with no option. You see, this kind of operation is very difficult to counter from the point of view that obviously the enemy is not seen by you, the intentions are not known, the place of the target is just anybody's guess, the intensity, the choice of weapons, everything is left to the option or the discretion of the person who's carrying out the terrorism. So with this backdrop, obviously, the Indians were left with no option but to support these elements. But unfortunately, because the Taliban have weak governance in the area, and obviously it suits India to collaborate with the Afghanistan government formally or informally or whatever level, and then to obviously facilitate. That has compounded to this. Now, you asking about what is the way forward? The way forward is, as I said, that this cannot be done and done and dusted. It has to be continued effort throughout till the time you eliminate this element of terrorism. Now, what can be done about it? There can be two-pronged thing. One is internal, that DGSPR talked about it, but the internal is that we need more cohesion. Unless you have solidarity within the country, support and trust within the people and the armed forces. Obviously, no armed force in the world can fight unless the people are behind them. So that's a must kind of thing. You must look for a bigger cause. We must look for a national interest to have better integration and cohesion and element of trust within the armed forces, law enforcement agencies, and the people of Pakistan. That obviously the politician, the government, and the armed forces know better how to move forward from this point onward. What I can comment better is the external factor. We are talking about the effects. The DGSPR was talking about the effects, the sacrifices, the martyrs who have laid down their lives for the country. This is the internal, this is the effect part. But what about the cause? The cause is obviously the weak governance, intentional, unintentional, or beyond their capacity, what the Taliban government has not been able to hold on or check these terrorist elements. Now, these elements can be engaged through the governance, the government of Afghanistan, although we do not formally recognize them, but Saudi Arab, which has recently gone into an agreement with us on the defense, can be one party. China can another be a party to it. Why? Because they have a good intimacy or relations with the Afghan government, and they have a good collaborative relation. These elements, four of these countries, the China, obviously Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, can move forward. And then the last point from my side is that Pakistan can press on these countries, especially Saudi Arabia, which has gone into defense pact, because Saudi Arabia should also be looking after our security and our national interest and peace in our country, should press upon the Afghan government that if they have the capacity to check these Taliban, they should. If they do not have it, they should facilitate and legitimate the intrusion by Pakistan by neutralizing these forces. That will give us some high moral ground and that an advantage over the regular relation that we have, and probably that's the option that I foresee can work out with the obviously diplomatic and political pressure of Saudi Arabia and China upon Afghan government.
Yes, Chisti Sab, there's also concern when we take a look at what is happening in terms of the developments taking place between India and Afghanistan on a political level as well. We see that the Afghan foreign minister, of course, is on a visit, and this is something that has happened for the first time since 2021. And initially, of course, there was a different engagement between the two sides, and now it seems that the embassy is also reopening, and there is a lot of good rhetoric in terms of relationships between both the countries that is emerging, not just in terms of trade and investment, but of course security and cooperation as well. And so when we take a look at what is happening on that front, do you think that after Russia, India can also be seen as the country that may follow with the recognition of the Afghan Taliban regime, and that in itself is also going to add to an even more increased collaboration on the defense and security paradigm, which of course are being using for the misinterests of both the countries?
Absolutely a good question. Why? Because this has not come as a surprise to me. India and Afghanistan have had close relations since the exit of the last government, since the Ashraf Ghani came in. When he was here, obviously Indians were well dug into Afghanistan under the name of development. They had established hospitals, they had established highways, infrastructure, the grid stations, the power supply station, and these things. They did two things. One, the government obviously had a soft corner toward them, and the people of Afghanistan got a good message from India. These are the times starting with Prime Minister Ashraf Ghani, President Ashraf Ghani. Since then, we saw that the people and the government have had soft corner. You have pointed out very rightly that India could even step in a step forward by recognizing formally the Afghan government. Why? Because the benefits which are attached with it. They will have a formal embassy presentation, they will have diplomats, and under the garb of diplomats what all can be or who all can be there in Afghanistan. That should be alarming for us also. However, counter to that is that Pakistan, in the previous question to answer to that, I said that Afghanistan government should be engaged through Saudi Arabia and China. Pakistan should also offer incentive to Afghanistan government that you see they can be connected with the corridor, Pakistan-China corridor, and they can also be offered a connection to the northern, the old Muslim states in the north of Afghanistan, and the other developments. I think this is going to be the whole package. You cannot just stand alone, take out one, because the Indians would always be interested in having the maximum influence and having Pakistan influence to minimize to the lowest possible level. So this is an ongoing thing, and not on one front, but many fronts have to be probably tapped, and any combination of that would be probably the best of for the future coming times.
Right. What about Russia and countries like Russia, Iran, and China? But most importantly, Russia, because it is one of the first countries to recognize Afghanistan, but it is also someone who's doing a lot in terms of at least the conversation on counterterrorism. We've just seen the Russian move take place, and that was important in terms of involving Afghanistan Taliban regime in the discussions around a stable and peaceful Afghanistan. What role can these countries play, and can they counter this India nexus with Afghanistan?
Sana, you see, we've been blessed with the present political and diplomatic situation globally. The position that I'm talking about, the relevance that we have gained in the recent last about 5 months. We fought with India and sent on a very hard and swift message to Indian armed forces that we cannot be bully around. So that the victory, that has brought power to us, the relevance to us. Indians had the thought or believed that Pakistan is no more relevant to the world and they can almost make it irrelevant to the global community. That did not happen. Rather, we made a huge jump and became very, very relevant, not only to the West, to the many other countries in the Middle East, but also especially the President of America. Now, this can be capitalized. Why? Because the world has started to listen to us, that we are a reality and we are a force to reckon with. I think we can take into account the Russian factor because the Russians have not been as close to the Indians as they were in the last about 3 to 4 decades. The things have changed for India globally. And that new normal should be capitalized by Pakistan and engaging many other countries. And obviously, like a post-Pahalgam incident, we offered that we are a sane country. We would like to go for a logic. We'll offer a neutral inquiry. And we did everything possible to stop the war. And the world has started to believe in us. And on top of that, what the claims came, the military claims, shooting down of the airplane, the Pakistan has earned a lot of credibility in the military corridors also. And the Indian Air Force chief, you've been noticing that 5 months down, they're still not sure, did they shoot 10 aircraft or 12? Did they shoot with the missile or some aircraft? How many aircraft shot down where with no proof, no wreckage? They lost a lot of credibility on the diplomatic, political, and military fronts. So much so that even you must have noticed that the Indian Air Force chief gave that briefing. And I was watching the international media, print and digital and everything. Hardly any media covered his statement. I mean, that's eye-opening, should be eye-opening for them also. And good for us that people, the world is not believing them. And I think this is the time we need to engage not only Russia, the other Western countries, showing our recent track record, engage particularly America, Saudi Arabia, and China, and hold India more accountable in a collaborative move against Pakistan.
Right. When we take a look at these dynamics with Russia, how do you think that that will be balanced by our dynamics with the U.S.? I understand there is a shift between what the U.S. Has had with India in the past as well, particularly with the Trump administration very clearly talking about the victory that Pakistan just had in the recent conflict, and then also in terms of the tariffs that have been imposed on India. But in terms of security cooperation, in terms of the kind of regional dynamics that exist and the spoiler elements that India brings to the table, do you think that the U.S. will be able to cooperate with Pakistan and other countries in the region to counter these issues within the region?
That's a very valid observation. But I must add here that we need to clear that friendship or closeness with one party does not mean the enmity with the other one. Like we have already shown a balance between China and US. When we are going towards US, obviously collaborating, the army chief and the air chief have visited USA. We never sent a message to China that the closeness or the alliance or any kind of collaboration or military hardware purchase or anything would be at the cost of China. I think we played our cards very well. We need to continue to do that. And in the name of terrorism, I think we can also highlight that if American president is obviously absolutely against any kind of terrorism, that it should not be so called against Hamas, what he calls. It should be against India or any other country sponsoring terrorism. And we must also highlight to the world that this is a state which is facilitating all this. And Taliban have had a record of this kind of activity where they have bad governance or they had little or no control over TTP. So I think we need to make a wholesome thing and make it more clear to these countries that we are not talking any trade. We are not talking about purchase of military hardware. We are talking about the terrorism and a campaign which probably the whole world should come together and stop these elements who create destabilization. And we haven't paid the price of this honorable officer, Lieutenant Colonel and Major, and the Jawans in the couple of days back. We have been paying it for this price for last many decades, and 80 to 90,000 people have been martyred. The families have been obviously uprooted from their villages. So we need to highlight that. I think the whole situation would make a lot of sense. The way we put it across, the most important factor would be that assuring these countries that when we want you to support us, it is not at the cost of something else or one country over other. We are talking about a menace which is international, which is a concern for everybody, and which is terrorism. And I think our logic should be bought by most of the people.
Right. Chisti Saab, I know you wanted to focus on the external factors, but I also want your take a little bit on what we need to do at home. There is, of course, the very important National Action Plan that the DG-ISPR has mentioned, and he also mentioned the judicial front that needs to be strengthened. And now, when we talk about counterterrorism operations that Pakistan has put into place, of course, there's so much that we have achieved in terms of the operations and in terms of eliminating this menace from the country. But in true letter and spirit, with both kinetic and non-kinetic elements of the National Action Plan and the judicial accountability that is required to follow through, where do you think that there is a need of perhaps a re-evaluation of our approach and strategy within our borders?
It's a very relevant question. It should be concern of everyone. You see, when we look back, what happened in May this year, obviously the Indian would have opted or loved to go for this kind of option, what I said in an answer to the first question. That obviously there should be a proxy element. And proxy element can only succeed if there is a crack, discomfort, lack of trust, or lack of cohesion between a society. And this is what they would be looking forward to. I'm sure of it. If there is more of internal differences within the political parties, within the unity, within the provinces, the reasons could be any. Obviously, I think the happiest country should be India. As a national cause, I think we need to come together, irrespective of the differences. Even we had fought 1965 war, our President Ayub Khan and Shastri went to Tashkent and obviously sat down for discussing the way forward. We can sit with the enemies, we need to sit together. And I think without it, the only happiness probably would be for the Indians that we are disjointed, because these proxy wars cannot meet success unless they have cracks, the disunity, lack of trust, or even an uncomfortable relation within obviously the people of Pakistan. And let me remind you at the last point that National Action Plan, it was jotted down in 2016. Even those days, we had a stiff resistance differences between the government and the opposition. But they sat together for a bigger cause. And now is the time again, I think we need to sit back, because these soldiers who are embracing, and the civilians who are embracing Shahadat every day almost, we owe them all, obviously. They do not belong to any particular party, a province, or any particular sect. I think they're Pakistanis. And we all need to appreciate that we need to be united. We owe it to these martyrs and their families, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Khalid Chisti, for joining us and being a part of the discussion today. It is very important for Pakistan to be able to engage in counterterrorism activities both at home and externally as well, and something that Pakistan has been fighting and paying the price for quite some time now. But unfortunately, the external elements, including India using Afghan territory against Pakistan, is something that continues. Pakistan has, of course, put forward this with evidence to the international community, has done it once again, but we will be taking a closer look at how this needs to be dealt with and how the Afghan Taliban regime in Afghanistan need to ensure that their territory is not used against any other soil. A peaceful and stable Afghanistan is in the favor not just for Pakistan but for the entire region. Our next story, we're going to be taking a look at where it is that the Gaza peace plan is standing at the moment. There is, of course, a lot of cause for celebration for the end of the firing and the ceasefire that needs to be put in place. But at the same time, there is a lot of concern in terms of how exactly this will be implemented. We have seen the U.S. president take a very personal interest, and he is going to be visiting the Middle East very soon, both Israel and Egypt, where celebrations are planned, and he may also witness the prisoner and hostage exchange. So we're going to be taking a closer look at what would that mean, not just for the peace plan to be executed, but to the dynamics that will exist now in the Middle East, and how then to move to the second phase, which is going to be very, very important. For this, we've been joined by Mr. Umer Karim, who's a research fellow, University of Birmingham, and Middle East analyst. Thank you very much for joining us and being a part of the discussion. Dr. Umer, I want your take on, when we take a look at this peace plan, there is, of course, a lot that is welcome in terms of the end of firing, in terms of ceasefire, prisoner exchange, and of course humanitarian aid being let into Gaza. But when we take a look at what the current dynamics are, first I want your take on whether or not you think this first phase will be possible to be implemented in a conducive environment, given the way that we've seen Israeli rhetoric coming on the forefront previously, and given the fact that there is a lot still left for the negotiating table?
I think that there will be a lot of uncertainty, but the bigger picture, in a manner, seems to be clear that this deal will go through because now the Israeli government has signed this deal. Yes, there will be differences and divergences between the two sides on the list of prisoners, for instance, especially Palestinian prisoners. Also, there will also be differences with regards to what would be the parameter to where the Israeli forces withdraw, and also what would be the sort of composition of a body which will eventually take over the administration of the Strip. So yes, there is still uncertainty. There is also, we as observers, we don't know who are the guarantors of this whole process. Is the United States President Donald Trump directly involved as a guarantor? And who is the guarantor from Hamas side? Is it Turkey, Egypt, or Qatar? So there are a lot of such issues at play. But I think that the broader dynamics of this deal are sorted, that there won't be any re-initiation of warlike hostilities. That doesn't mean that the occupation itself has ended, because the occupation, in the broader term, is an occupation of land, air, and its sea, which would continue. The siege-like situation perhaps still would continue, but at least for now, there will be some respite for the population that has been constantly hammered by Israeli aggression for the last 2 years.
I'm glad you mentioned that occupation still continues, because it seems like that's what our eyes need to be set on. And so when we take a look at how this is the first phase, and while of course it's necessary for us to move forward, and so it's much appreciated, but in terms of how we move from this step to the next one, we've seen that there is a lot of interest being taken by the U.S. president. Of course, he has been championing himself as being the lead in establishing peace and ending so many wars in his tenure. But I want your take then on what sort of a contribution he or others around him can make in ensuring that we move from this point to the next one, because the second phase, like you said, will have to answer questions such as what a Palestinian Authority will look like, what will it be in terms of Hamas's disarmament. Again, a question that Mr. Trump answered in saying that there will be disarmament, but there's no such understanding as far as we know.
I think that the bigger issue with regards to President Trump is that he gets distracted from an issue after a while. So we can expect that he may just move on to another issue, another situation, and just forget about what has happened in Gaza. And I think this is where the other interlocutors like Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and the eight group Islamic countries consortium, they would be really important, because they can continue to engage with President Trump, and they can keep alive that channel so that he remains engaged within the situation. And I think that this will remain key because, and the other thing perhaps would be any possible economic investments or economic engagement from the US or perhaps from President Donald Trump's son-in-law within the Gaza Strip. And with regards to the disarmament of Hamas, I think that there was this sort of a thing was very clear within the movement itself that for a conducive peace to happen with Israel, Hamas has to leave the administration of the Strip and also to vacate its role as the law enforcer within the Strip, which at the end of the day is not actually a defeat for Hamas because Hamas in itself, through its members as residents of Gaza, will always remain there within the Strip. And this also means that this administration is not going towards the PLO or Fatah. So, in a manner, we are seeing a new dynamic emerging within the Strip where the US is involved or perhaps would get involved in a manner which it had not been before. And this trio of Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar, they also would be involved to a much greater degree, at least within this reconstruction phase. And I think that for now, there is also relatively less appetite within the Israeli political spectrum to continue this sort of violence. Of course, there was appetite within the government coalition, but right now it seems that they have been vetoed by President Trump.
The larger Middle East, we also know Israel has attacked a number of countries. It's not just Gaza. Of course, the genocide is only in Gaza, but there has been so many other attacks that have continued. And most recently in Doha, of course, the Qatari Prime Minister also played a very important role in these negotiations. But it is one of the countries that have been struck by Israel. And so when we take a look at the larger Middle Eastern context, how do you see Trump's visit now to the Middle East and to Israel is going to pan out in terms of the way that the Arab Islamic countries are going to look at these developments and then eventually have a different way of dealing with Israel? Do you think that post this situation and the way that the peace plan is being put forward, there will be a different Israel or a different Netanyahu to deal with?
I don't think so that there will be a different Netanyahu because what we have seen that the Netanyahu government has adopted a policy of exerting and projecting its strategic dominance, not just within its this region of the Levant, which consists of Lebanon, Palestine, Syria, or Jordan, let's say, but to the whole Middle East, or at least to areas including the Arabian Gulf states or Iran and Iraq. So this kind of shows a bigger picture here within the ranks of the Israeli government that they are now extending their security dominance to the whole Middle East. And the bigger issue is that there has been no pushback from the American president on this dynamic. Although there was some pushback on the Israeli strike in Qatar, but the Americans couldn't stop that strike. That was the bigger issue for many regional stakeholders. And I think this would be the bigger issue right now, that till Prime Minister Netanyahu is in power, this sort of pariah nature of Israeli security infrastructure and security dominance would be continuing, and the sovereignty or territorial integrity of states bordering Israel, like Syria, Lebanon, and perhaps Iraq and Iran, that would remain under constant threat. And I think that this is why the regional security infrastructure is evolving, and this is why we see that eventually Saudi Arabia entered a strategic pact with Pakistan.
For joining us and being part of today's debate. There is, of course, a lot of concern as to how exactly these developments will pan out, especially when we talk about the larger Middle Eastern interests. But Mr. Trump's visit to the area is going to be an important one that will influence these dynamics, and then, of course, ensure that the implementation of the first phase is carried out properly, and also then to move this discussion forward to the next phase. It is, of course, very, very important to remember that Palestine will not be free till we have a free Palestine. And so it is essential to understand where it is that we lie in terms of the core issues and the core problems that exist. But for now, of course, this is an important step forward, and the ceasefire and the end of suffering for the people of Gaza needs to begin with the end of the firing. But how exactly will these dynamics also unfold in the larger context of the Arab Islamic region, and then, of course, the international community, remains to be seen. And for that, we've been joined by Dr. Muqtedar Khan, who's Professor of International Relations at the University of Delaware. Thank you, Dr. Muqtedar, for joining us today. I'd like your take first in terms of how you see these particular developments when we talk about the peace plan. There is a lot that has been put forward by the U.S. administration and its influence, and of course other key players, including Qatar, Turkey, and other countries that have played their own role in ensuring that this happens. But in terms of the success that it entails, how do you take a look at what this would mean then as to what Gaza's future will be and what the Middle Eastern future will look like?
Thank you for having me. I think the biggest relief is that aid will now flow into Gaza. So besides the fact that there was genocidal violence on the people of Gaza, there was also starvation taking place and children were dying of hunger, which was very painful and troubling to watch. So for me, the biggest relief is that as soon as the two sides signed it and the Israeli Security Cabinet approved the deal, now about 600 trucks per day are going to enter Gaza with additional aid, and hopefully that should essentially mitigate the suffering of the people of Gaza. So I think the best thing that has come out of this is that there is aid that is going to flow endlessly, unlimited aid. That is how President Trump defined it. But let's be optimistic about it. The phase one has been approved, which is soon, hopefully by Monday, Hamas will release the 20 hostages who are still alive, and then the Israel has already started withdrawing apparently. But the negotiations for the second phase are going to be very difficult because one of the conditions is that Hamas has to fully disarm, and essentially it will cease to exist. It will not only have no military presence, but its entire network of assets such as tunnels, etc., will be eventually destroyed, and it will have no say in the governance of Gaza. So that must be a very difficult pill for Hamas to swallow. So we will see what happens with the second phase negotiations, but let's hope that the first phase goes through. In the long term, I think that it's going to be an entirely different Middle East if this comes through, because assuming that Hamas does disarm itself and assuming that there is a technocratic government in place with somebody like Tony Blair and Donald Trump in charge of Gaza, this is in a way direct colonization by Western countries. So there will be a period in which Gaza now will be ruled by US and UK. And I don't know how that is going to go. That does not mean that other Palestinian groups may not emerge. This does not dismantle Islamic Jihad. So we will see what happens going forward and what role the Arab countries play. For Pakistan, this is an opportunity if it wants to play a role in the Middle East, because one of the things that is going to happen is the establishment of what is called as the International Stabilization Force. And I think while the Gulf countries are willing to provide billions of dollars, the estimate for reconstruction of Gaza is $53 billion. So maybe $10, $20 billion will come from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates. But are they going to put boots on the ground? And that's where the role of, I think, non-Arab countries like Turkey and Pakistan will come in, and maybe there will be an opportunity or pressure for these countries to provide to the ISF. And then obviously Donald Trump will try to expand the Abrahamic Accords. He's calling for Iran also to sign in up. And I think there will be informally a lot of pressure on Pakistan also if it plays a role in the Middle East to sign up on the Abrahamic Accords if all goes well. But ultimately, this plan has no plan for a two-state solution. There's nothing there. And there's no timeline for that. And plus, there is nothing in this plan which stops the violence in West Bank, the expansion of settlements in West Bank. So it is quite possible, God forbid, but it's possible that the violence may just relocate itself to the West Bank while Gaza is under United States and Tony Blair's governance.
Very essential aspects, Dr. Khan, and I want to explore a little bit further, especially when we take a look about where in all of this is going to be the will and the representation of the people of Palestine, and where is the free Palestine that everyone has been demanding. And so when we take a look at bodies that are responsible for ensuring that there is peace and that there are rights that people have been asking for, that they're given to them, and there are international laws and values in place, how do you see the involvement of bodies like the United Nations that have also declared it to be a genocide deal with the certain situations and dynamics that are evolving, not just in terms of what needs to be put in place, especially in terms of who is it that will be calling the shots, as you talked about, how they're going to be external representations of world leaders and countries from the UK or the US. Why can it not be a more neutral body or structure that does that? And then how exactly will that be ensured that there is accountability of what has happened? Because of course right now we all want this to stop and of course the suffering to end and aid to reach the people of Gaza. But what about what happened in the past 2 years? Who's going to hold Israel and Netanyahu responsible for the crimes that he has committed?
Sana, that's the critical point. Gaza is not only a site of devastation, but it's a crime scene. So we need human rights organizations to go in there as soon as possible and start documenting the genocide that took place. And this is something that under Tony Blair, Tony Blair is there to cover up, basically. He's going to try and minimize and hide the crimes against humanity, crimes against the people of Gaza that the Israeli army has committed there. So yes, we need to have human rights organizations there documenting this systematically, even if not to hold accountable, but at least to tell the story of what happened here to future generations. And that is one thing. But let's not assume that this thing is going to go through smoothly. For example, where is Donald Trump going to find the technocratic people who are also from Gaza and have no connections to Hamas? So is he going to go to West Bank and recruit people from West Bank who are Palestinians to go there? Or is it going to be just packed with people from Jared Kushner's company who are going to be running Gaza? So the next step, of course, the biggest hurdle is of Hamas, whether it disarms or not. And I think Netanyahu is hoping that Hamas refuses to disarm fully, then it will allow him to continue with the war in some way or the other. And the deep withdrawals are also not complete. Like after the first phase, Israel will still occupy 53% of Gaza. After the second phase, it will still be occupying 45% of Gaza. And then towards the end, it will still have a buffer zone which occupies 15% of Gaza. And that is going to be very dangerous because that is going to instigate some young Palestinians to take action. But you are right, very much, that there has to be some accountability. And I think there are private assurances being given to Netanyahu and others that there will be no accountability if this war stops. And let me tell you that while the Western countries have, in the past few weeks, stood up and given some lip service sort of sanctions to Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, the two really right-wing extremist ministers in Netanyahu's cabinet, and some threats to ban Israel from various cultural events. But once this war stops, it will be just a matter of time that everything will be forgotten in the West, and Israel will be back again as it was before this genocide began. And that is where the role of human rights activists, people who speak truth to power, they must not take their eye off the ball. And of course, we will see what role the Arab countries play, whether they are going to be happy that the fighting has stopped and there will be no progress and demands towards establishing a Palestinian state in the borders that it has been imagined in the past, 1967 borders. So those are big issues, but fortunately, there's more recognition of the Palestinian state. So it becomes a bit more difficult for Israel to erase the Palestinian state. And additionally, Israel has lost a lot of goodwill in the United States, which is critical, absolutely critical for Israel to maintain its dominance in the Middle East. And we will see most Muslim countries, especially Arab countries, have realized now that they cannot entirely rely on the United States to protect them, especially after Israel attacked Qatar. So they are looking to diversify. Saudi Arabia turned to Pakistan to establish a defense tie. So hopefully there will be more understanding that, look, we signed up the Abrahamic Accords, we got nothing for it. We got bombed. The Gulf was bombed by Israel. So we will see what happens going forward. But the two or three things are positives that we must not forget. One, that because of this deal, there is no ethnic cleansing of Gazans taking place by force. They may choose to leave because life is absolutely unlivable at the moment in Gaza. And if there is delays in reconstruction, then life is going to be impossible there. I hope aid really, really comes in, and at least, as we get closer to winter, there's shelter also generated. So one good thing that has happened is there is no ethnic cleansing. Number two, the Israeli occupation is ending. Number three is aid is being provided. There is no discussion of democracy or self-governance in Donald Trump's plan. That word doesn't occur. So how long will this team chosen, I think, by Tony Blair, probably Tony Blair, Jared Kushner, and Steve Witkoff probably will be playing a role in collaboration with Egypt, Jordan, and Qatar in selecting people who will govern Gaza. How long is that going to go? Is there a timeline to have an election in Gaza? Or like, I don't know how that is going to happen. And is there any chance of integrating Gaza with West Bank? One of the reasons why there was no progress, at least in terms of official Western discourse, was because West Bank and Gaza were not united. So there was no partner for Israel to make a deal with. Will we have a partner now for peace? So those are big questions that need to be addressed.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Muqtedar Khan, for joining us and being a part of the debate and sharing your views. It's absolutely essential for us to remember these aspects because they are what will require for us to move forward for true peace in Palestine. Thank you for joining us. There is, of course, a lot of concern as to how this will proceed further and what is going to be the future. But as Dr. Khan was mentioning, it is important to count our victories today and to see that there is an end of the suffering for the moment, at least, and aid to enter into Gaza, which will be essential for this discussion to move forward and how it is then that will be taken forward. We're going to be, of course, taking a closer look at how these evolves as Mr. Donald Trump visits the Middle East and exploring what will be the consequences. But one thing's for sure, that there needs to be a lot of international attention to how Palestine is going to be moving forward and what discussions are going to be held for the second phase of this peace plan. We're now going to be taking a look at our third story that takes a look at the very important Nobel Peace Prize, something that Mr. Donald Trump had his eyes on for quite some time now, but he's not the winner of this Peace Prize. It is, in fact, the Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, that has won for her efforts for promoting democracy in the region and for supporting pro-democratic movements in a country that has been marred by dictatorship since 2013. Ms. Machado has studied engineering and finance and had a short career in business. She founded in 1992 an organization that works to benefit street children. She's also somebody who's formed another organization promoting free and fair elections, conducting training and election monitoring. In 2010, she was elected to the National Assembly, winning a record number of votes, but the regime expelled her from office in 2014. She then led the opposition party and in 2017 helped found the Soy Venezuela Alliance, which then unites the pro-democratic forces in the country. In 2023, she announced her candidacy for president for the 2024 presidential elections in Venezuela, but she was blocked from running. After then, she supported the opposition's alternative candidate and has been working towards establishing democracy in Venezuela. Important, particularly in terms of how this discussion needs to be put forward as to the forces of good around the world that are working for peace and struggling against opposition. And a very important statement coming in from Ms. Maria herself. As you can see, she is saying that this recognition of the struggle of Venezuelans is a boost to conclude our task, and that is to conquer freedom. She also says that we are on the threshold of victory, and today more than ever we count on President Trump, the people of the United States, the peoples of Latin America, and the democratic nations of the world as our principal allies to achieve freedom and democracy. She goes on to dedicate this prize to the suffering people of Venezuela and to Mr. President Trump for his decisive support of our cause. And that in itself is a call for champions of peace around the world working towards establishing freedom in various parts of the region, and for these forces to align together and synergize their efforts. And so this is a big move forward, particularly when we talk about the recognition that the Nobel Peace Prize gives, and then of course to important world leaders such as Ms. Machado and Mr. Trump that have been working towards establishing peace and freedom in the entire international community. The crux of the debate today has been, when we take a look at what has happened, of course, around the international community, it's important to understand that counterterrorism is important for not just countries like Pakistan, but the entire region and international community that has been fighting this menace. And for that, the forces need to be united and need to realize the kind of spoiler elements that exist in the form of India using Afghan territory. And that is something that the international community must be cognizant of. At the same time, of course, we welcome the very important peace plan in Gaza and the implementation of these efforts to ensure that there is a free Palestine in the future. For now, the ceasefire and humanitarian aid reaching the people of Gaza, and for hostage and prisoner exchange to take place as early as Monday or Tuesday, as Mr. Trump has announced, is a welcome step forward. And lastly, of course, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Ms. Maria Corina Machado, more power to her and leaders like her around the world that have been working towards the progress and prosperity of their people and for the international community. That's all that we have from the debate today. We'll now see you Monday.